साउंड चेक करना है. क्लिक करना एक बार. ज्योति, पीपल इस पे क्लिक करो, कितने लोग हैं दिखाओ. ओके फाइन. ये ज्यादा जूम हो गया, कम करो थोड़ा. कम करो. चलो हाँ ठीक है. तो बट ये फ्रेम अच्छा लगाओ, कोई बात नहीं. तो भाई क्या पढ़े हो अभी तक, कुछ बताओ. What have you studied till now? Polity will have lecture 1, concepts of polity today. Fine, and how questions are designed, we'll talk about it. Jyoti, kindly switch on the lights. Jyoti, lights जलाओ. पीछे lights. ठीक. What do you know of polity? बताओ भैया, इतना से बैठे मत रहो. हाँ मुझे ठीक दिख रहा है, बट वो उसमें कैसा आ रहा है ऐप में, ये चेक कर लेना है ना, ऐप में कैसा आ रहा है. नहीं बट हाउ इट इज विजिबल वी आर नॉट एबल टू नो. ये फ्रेम तुम्हारा हो गया. कोई बात नहीं. इज इट लेखाश्री, इज इट विजिबल प्रॉपर्ली एंड ऑडिबल? जस्ट लेट मी नो. ठीक है, अगर उस पर इट इज विजिबल देन फाइन. ओके सो विल, कोई बात नहीं, इट्स ओके. वेयर इज कुंदन? कुंदन गायब. सुनो क्यों? Why? अच्छा. What happened? He is not coming back. प्रियांशु, आकांक्षा, पूजा, लेखा. ठीक है फाइन. Palak, polity. What are the basics? How do you start studying polity? आओ भैया, रानी साहिबा जल्दी आओ. Good morning. No. How do you start? I mean, you start studying preamble directly. That is more about Indian Constitution, no? I'm talking about in general. How do you study Constitution or polity, right? So we'll talk about today basic concepts on which number of questions are asked. Correct. Right. Okay. So when I'm using this term polity, right, and I'm using the term constitution, obviously all of you know that any society requires a system to govern, right? That society may have its own historical and cultural background. Based on the historical and cultural background of a society, the nature of polity is created. Basically, political systems are artificial systems. They are not natural systems, like society or family. Fine, even society is an artificial system, but it is born out of the natural system called family. So any society requires a system to govern, right? That means the system of governing comes from the system of power. Without power, no society can be governed. So what is the most fundamental thing to understand? That polity is a system of power. Polity is a very loose term for political system. Right? Every year you see around 15, 20 questions are there directly, right? Varying from 12 to 20, right? And out of that, 5 to 6 questions are always on concepts. Apart from legislature, speaker, president, right? Anti-defection, whatever you say. Apart from that, always 5 to 6 questions are on concepts. That means around 10 marks will always be from these concepts, right? So any system which is based on the premise of power will be called a polity. The word polity is a simple term for world political system. Now, what comprises this political system? This is important. What is the basic content? What are the ingredients of this political system? People, correct. Citizens. Okay, that may be one, more formula-based analysis. I'm simply asking about very basic things. What will a political system constitute? See, constitutional government is a very big term. It's a more broad term, right? It's bigger than constitution. Source refer to MP Jain, Indian constitutional law. बताओ, तुम ही सब बताओगे, तुम बताओ भी. No, but what will this comprise of? Basic things. Now you said, okay, correct, citizens. Obviously, but you have used the term citizen basically to indicate the emergence of modern liberal political systems. Right? These are some key concepts. Liberal political systems. You are using the word citizens for them, whereas political system may be of any form. It may be liberal, it may be autocratic, it may be dictatorial, it may be monarchical, it doesn't matter. Because it is a form of power. All these systems, they arrange power in a particular way. So whether it is monarchy, benevolent monarchy, right? Exploitative monarchy, totalitarian, dictatorial, right? Presidential, parliamentary, or whatever the form may be. It doesn't matter. Right? The basic premise is power. How that power is arranged forms the political system. So it will have citizens, or we can say people. Right? So political systems, the basic ingredient would be people, no doubt. Then, so you can call them as subjects if they are part of traditional systems, right? Monarchies, dictatorial regimes, and likewise. Or you can call them as citizens if they are part of the liberal political systems. So there will be people. What else? Then you will have a political structure. Right? You will have a political structure. Now, if you talk about democracy, then we'll have political parties. Right? We will have a form of state. Is it or not? We'll have political parties, we'll have state, and we'll have a system of doing things. You are PABAT students, you can understand. We'll have an administration. So major components, people, political parties, state, administration. Right? What else? Correct? Fine. Okay, when we say state, we include many things in that. Correct? Now, what else? Don't you have a legal system? Right? Will there be a law or not? Right? All this will be functioning within what? A legal system. So you'll have a legal system. The legal system is not about judicial. The legal system is the overall framework of law. Right? This legal system will be based on some fundamental premises, or it will be based in a particular format, right? That format will be documented. That document will be called as constitution. So see, polity emerges first, or the constitution. Now that is a question. Yes, polity emerges, right? But what gives shape to that polity is the constitution. So constitution and polity have a vice versa relationship. Now this is a basic statement which can be asked in the prelims. Okay, what creates the political system? The constitution, or constitution creates the, or political system creates the constitution? See, both have a vice versa relationship. The constitutions are product of a specific political system that we have designed, that we have visualized. Otherwise, it will not come into existence. Are you getting? So, legal system based on some fundamental principles. Right? For example, we say, okay, justice. In our political system, justice is important. Equality is important. Right? Rights of people are important. And likewise. So, these fundamental principles would be aggregated now. Right? We will, let us say, define it, and then we will legitimize it. This legitimization process may be through a constituent assembly or whatever be the mechanism, and council, then we'll call this as constitution. Now this is a very unique thing, that can there be a constitution in a monarchical system? Can there be a constitution in dictatorial system? Yes, everywhere. Anywhere where we have a fundamental law which governs the society is called constitution, right? But this constitution is the highest legal document, right? Now there is the idea now, see? Yes, very. Yes.
And political structure constitution different, but constitution will be more powerful than political system.
Yeah, see, no, it will not be more powerful. Try to understand. If political systems have power to change the constitution, who is more powerful? Political system is powerful, right? But the logic of creating a constitution itself is that political system cannot change it whenever it wants. That is why there is a rigid procedure, a strict procedure would be implemented in this constitution. So we create the constitution for ourselves, right? Or someone creates it for us. Now that makes the difference between the nature of political system. The monarch and his people create the constitution for us, for the people, right? That will not be the liberal constitution. That will not be a democratic constitution, right? But that will be a constitution. So constitution in very basic sense means something which creates or something which governs a political system. Right? How, why, to what extent public participation, people's role, or to what extent this power flows from the society to the constitution, right? It depends upon the nature of political system. So fundamentally, the character of the constitution is decided by the political system and not vice versa. Because constitution ultimately is a product of humans. Is it or not? It's not a sacrosanct document. It's not coming from the divine intervention, right? But see, if monarchies create or whatever traditional systems create constitution, then it becomes somewhere coming from the traditional influence, where the king may be considered to be like a god. So those constitutions would be sacrosanct, but in other sense, that they are untouchable by the people. When we say our constitution is sacrosanct, we are talking other sense, that people possess the power to change it at no one else. Yes, legal rational, correct. So fundamentally, the constitutions govern or run the polity, right? Now, when constitutions are implemented, or for matter, constitutions are created, right? You can have two forms. In fact, you can have three forms. But let's talk about first two forms. One, you write it. right? One, you keep it as convention. Certain things you write, majority of the things you keep as convention, right? How to define convention? Okay, let's talk about simpler thing, written. When you have written the constitution, what have you done? These principles, right? These premises, provisions, ideas, whatever you talked about, that you have put into a particular framework. This framework has been authenticated by a law. That is called enactment. See, constitution makes law, but to make the constitution also there is a need for a law. Well, that is the idea of a legal system. Even the creation of constitution cannot be arbitrary. Right? Can it be arbitrary? No. Right? So, even when you are creating this constitution, right, this cannot be arbitrary. And that is makes the difference, that if the constitutions are created in arbitrary manner by one person, by a group of people, right, those constitutions are not technically what we believe today is the constitution. So those constitutions exist, but those constitutions are led or controlled by the group of people. Fine. So they are elite constitution, they are plutarchy, you understand? Controlled by wealthy people, right? Oligopolic constitution by few people, right? Monarchical constitution by a person or a group of people who dominate the system. Dictatorial constitution, right? Zimbabwe, many other countries, African countries, right? Latin American countries were criticized for that. So likewise, you can say that when you are creating this system, then you are trying to put that into a written framework, right? When you write something in a defined framework enacted by law, what it becomes now? It becomes more you can say it like a fact. It becomes established, right? It becomes authenticated. So when you write it, right, it becomes established, right, or it becomes authenticated. Right? Now this document, now this constitution, right, somewhere now becomes above the political system now. The political system which authorized the formation of this constitution now through a law enacts it and gives its supremacy. That from now on, okay, 26 November 1949 or 26 January 1950, from now on, right, all the power which belongs to the society will flow through you. So constitution is not sovereign, people are sovereign, right? Sovereign constitutions will have other implications. So constitution is not sovereign, people are sovereign, right? But people and constitution relationship is direct. The people are the source of power to the constitution, and then from the constitution the source of power flows to legislature, executive, judiciary. Understanding this? This is a big difference. So source of power of the people is not constitution. The source of power of the constitution is the people. ये समझ में आ रहा है? लिखते रहो. This is how the prelims will be designed, right? We are not getting into too much of descriptive writing. And anyways, you'll get the content, but logically, right? These things will not be part of any standard content. So we have to understand that, yes, a written constitution emerges. The written constitution becomes established, authenticated, and now it becomes the source of power or source of all powers. So written constitutions have certain benefits. It has certain specific character. You write it, right? You can write it in monarchy also, that's not a problem. But if you write it, then what do? You first define, right? You define the order, the hierarchy of laws. That's the first basic thing you do by making a constitution. You define the hierarchy of things, how they will operate, what will be operating above something else, how this hierarchy of laws, hierarchy of actions, hierarchy of systems will be created. By this way, what do? You make things rigid. Okay. Rigid means obviously they are not, they can be changed, right? But they cannot be changed easily. Yes. So you make a law, through that law you enact the constitution, then constitution becomes now the source of the law. So the law which created the constitution remains no more valid now. Because now constitution becomes the source of law. Are you getting? So the law which created the constitution was superior to the constitution. But once the constitution has been enacted now, right, that law does not remain in force. Constituent Assembly was no more needed once the constitution was created. It's not that it was not relevant, but its relevance was purely to create the constitution. So the reason for existence of 𝗟𝗿𝗿 for the Constituent Assembly was what? The creation of constitution. Once it is created, now the product is created. Now you cannot dilute this product. Now that will control the political system. So written constitution creates hierarchy of laws, hierarchy of institutions, right? It creates established procedures, established what you can say, premises, legal premises on which the system will now function. So many constitutions of the world, US, India, Canada, Australia, many constitutions of the world are written constitutions, right? They are democracies also, fortunately, right? So we have a first concept of polity and the relationship of polity with constitution. So written constitution gives us a lot of benefits. It also restricts the power of those who created it. That is why I'm saying the Constituent Assembly does not remain that powerful anymore. Because then it can create another constitution. What now then? See? So the sanctity of that constitution will be lost. It will not remain fundamental anymore if we give power to the system which created the constitution. Understanding? So the Constituent Assembly is like that pin of the bomb. Once the pin is taken out, it has no relevance now. It is the bomb only, right? तो उसका character important तो है, pin तो चाहिए, right? But pin को एक बार निकाल दिया, then doesn't matter now, right? Now the important role is only of that bomb. The grenade, you've seen that, right? So let us understand this way. So constitutions written, right? On another type of constitutions, right, are unwritten type. UK, Singapore, and likewise, right? Now these constitutions, when we say unwritten, okay, we do not mean that there is nothing which is not written. Okay? Magna Carta, when? 36, 1215. 1215, 1236 तो रजिया सुल्तान है भैया. So, right, 1215 AD, whatever. Now Magna Carta became one of the most, or you can say historically, globally, it is considered to be one of the landmark, right? Even though before that also we have a lot of other references in Indian context, right? Where kings have given a lot of rights, kings already were following a particular democratic system, right? So Magna Carta was considered to be one of the first or earliest documents that defined the rights of people in a monarchy. So when you look at UK, the basic principles of governance, right, the basic premise, the legal frameworks, they are all product of what? They are product of several historical developments over a period of time. right? And all of them are considered to be instrumental. All of them are considered to be important in defining what framework of law they have today. So you can also say because their countries were free, they had a continuity of governance. Right? We cannot keep using Mughals of Delhi Sultanate Sabka Hum framework, so we cannot take it together, no, because they are very distinct. They are segregated type of systems. So when you think of UK, right, or many other European countries, you see there is a continuity of systems, and because of that, whatever historically happened, right, that led to something, emergence of something else next, emergence of something next. So there is a kind of continuity in their influence. So that all culminated into what you can say an aggregate of laws, rules, systems, resolutions, principles, right, conventions, traditions. It culminated into that. And as there was a continuity, right, as there was a clarity in terms of how they were being governed over a period of time, right, it created or it made it easy for them to aggregate all this together. So they have a conventional constitution. When we say conventional constitution, we do not refer to just conventions. We are referring to something which is born out of traditional impacts, which is born out of traditional changes over a period of time. So conventional constitutions or unwritten constitutions, right, may have a major portion coming from, right, historical influences. Then legal judgments. Many of the changes would have happened because of legal changes, legal judgments, judicial pronouncements, and likewise, right? Then legislative enactments. Historical influences, legal judgments, legislative enactments. Then, कुछ चीजें ऐसी नहीं आएंगी भाई, डिमांड्स ऑफ पीपल. Correct. Culture, values, changing values, dynamic values, right? Marx wrote one of the first book on the laws of the theft of the wood. Right? He wanted to analyze how the laws operate, right, with respect to something which was a big crime then, the theft of the wood. And then through this he portrayed that how the laws were discriminatory. When you think of Britishers or Gandhiji's incident, right, that he was not allowed to sit in the first class compartment, was it a law? If it was not law, then how it was operating? See, that was convention. Fine. But by social practices meant me and all you started following it, right? Obviously, caste-based marriage is not a law in this country. Nahi hai na bhai. You cannot say, no, bhai, I will only marry with a person of my caste only, and this is how the law operates. Law doesn't talk about it. But social practices and customs have authorized it. They have legitimized it, right? So demands of citizens and social practices. So Gandhiji making the salt at Sabarmati and breaking the salt law. Now that was a law, fine? But that law somewhere undermined our conventional practice. We could make namak ourselves, right? That would have been a convention, a tradition in many villages, in many areas in the country. At least 90% people would be doing that. But the law violated this convention, right? So it is possible that conventions and laws will come in contradiction only when they will be written. And that is where the unwritten constitution becomes more flexible, more accommodating of social changes. So legal principles or legal premises keep changing, right, as social practices want them to. So unwritten or conventional constitution does not purely mean that it is unwritten, right? It may not be documented at one place. That is the idea. So its sources may be diverse and varied. The governance would be based on multiple sources, multiple dimensions, which originate or which interact with each other over a period of time. So laws, customs, practices, traditions, social demands, they might be interacting with each other. And from there flows a net outcome, you understand? So now UPSC would be interested in that. By which of the following is not a feature of a conventional constitution? And it might write the legal, the written principles, right? And you might be compelled to answer it as yes, this is correct, but it is not correct. Because every conventional constitution will also have one part which will be written part. Written means it will be deriving its source from something which is already defined, something which is rigid, right? Like, for example, in Britain, we have a famous jurist, a famous philosopher, Blackstone, right? So, Britain में Blackstone's commentary. Blackstone's commentaries on legal traditions, on legal developments, right? That becomes one very important source of the Constitution or principles of Constitution. Right? You say 𝗍𝗍's rule of law. It also becomes an important framework to think of or to evaluate whether there is a rule of law or not. See? So it's logical that UK did not write somewhere the rule of law, what is rule of law, what is law, right? But they can just or always refer to 𝗍𝗍's. So one thing is very clear that written constitutions give more stability, but unwritten or conventional constitutions give more dynamism. That is very clear, right? Written constitution focus more on procedural legitimization, procedural authentication. Formalities are more, right? So if I say, do you agree that written constitutions are more formal? Correct, right? They are more or impacted by formal protocols. Yes. The unwritten are not impacted by formal protocols. Which has more humanistic element? Both have, no. Now there the concept has to be understood. Both may have humanistic elements, right? It doesn't mean that written constitutions cannot be modified. They can be modified. So you're trying to say that written will be fundamentally not taking into consideration the human aspect, the human values? No, that is not true.
That also depends on the political structure.
Oh, that's fine, but both can have. Our logic is that they can have. Both will have humanistic orientation. Fine. Written constitutions are subject to, or they have more democratic aspect. Or unwritten constitutions have more democratic aspect. Both can have, right? But unwritten will have more. Why? Because just now we said one of the sources, अब यहाँ पे sources of change कहाँ है? Legislature, right? Or you go to the constitution, you think of changing the constitution, modifying the constitution, and then probably you can add something to that. No? But here it is easy for people to influence their constitutions because the mindset is not that rigid, it is not that formal. Both can be evolutionary, yes, both can be evolutionary, depends upon it, but relatively the written constitution is rigid and unwritten is not. So the tendency of being evolutionary is more of unwritten than the written, because it can easily interact with the society. Where will the discretion be high? Unwritten. Written will have less discretion. Both will have discretion, right? But written will have obviously much less discretion compared to the unwritten one. Any doubt in this? But discretion is subject to the use of that authority, right? So definitely, the constitutions which are unwritten will have more discretion. Generally, unwritten constitutions suit the unitary system. So unitary political systems work well with conventional or unwritten constitutions. Why?
Because the power is centralized, there will be no
Clashes. There is no need for dividing the power, first of all. Correct? Then? We say that, okay, unwritten constitutions will have more correlation, more relationship with the unitary form of governments. Why? So you have two broad type of political systems, unitary and federal, right? In unitary system, the system simply means that there is a centralized government, even though it may be a big territory, it doesn't matter, but there is a centralized government, and the lower levels of government, there will be local government, there will be regional government, right? Britain has all of them, but the regional and the local government are being used only as administrative extension of the union government. They are like the subordinate officers of the union government. So there does not emerge any need. There does not emerge any need, right, of having a division of authority or division of power, or control of a centralized government becomes more easy when the things are not written, because day-to-day operational problems may arise and they can be easily taken up or easily resolved by a unwritten or conventional constitution. So there will be no demand for any other change coming from within. Even if it comes, it will be easy for the centralized government to make these changes. So generally they are compatible with each other. But when you have a federal system, a federal polity, then the written constitution becomes mandatory. Why?
so that there is no clash of the powers and there is a defined way of structure. So when it's a federal polity, there needs to be codified division of powers.
Correct.
That's what. So that there is minimal discretion in allocation or decentralization of power.
Right. Okay. You're right. Federal system. Right. How do you find federal? Federa. Federis. ये कुछ बोलोगे?
Different layers of government working together.
See, political systems may be same. A unitary government, democratic polity, unwritten constitution. Right? Now the same territory, right? A federal government or federal polity, written constitution, same territory. What is the difference?
The power to legislate exists.
See, one thing that you talked about initially, the historical factors have a lot of role in defining the nature of polity, right? Both are legitimate forms. Unitary is not exploitative, first, that should be clear. Unitary is not dictatorial, though dictatorial can be unitary. अब आ रहा कुछ आ रहा एंटीना थोड़ा ऊपर करो. तो The dictatorial can be unitary, right? Unitary may not be dictatorial. So whenever a political design or political structure, right, visualizes itself or focuses more on homogeneity, right, maintaining that homogeneity, then it will go for unitary model because that will serve its purpose. The culture, right, the region, the ethnicity, the language, they may have homogeneity. So unitary system with democracy may function very well. Why? Because there will be an acceptance. There will be legitimacy, right? If the political system or nature of society is heterogeneous, extreme diversity, regional variations, right? The nature of political or the historical political changes, right? They were not, or they have come from diverse elements, diverse groups, demography, then the nature of polity may not be unitary or may not be needed as unitary. So you may need a federal model. So what is a federal model, right? It is purely a variation of a political system, right? Not necessarily the value system, try to understand. In unitary system also you have democracy, value, democratic, citizenship, participation, election, everything, right? In a federal model also you may have democratic polity. We are not changing the political value, we are not changing the political ethics, but we are changing the arrangement of power. Why? Because we realize that having a centralized government may not be acceptable by the diversity which is at the periphery of this political system. So federal systems, right, first need to be created because of the diversity, the heterogeneity that may exist in that society. Secondly, like I said, right, the historical factors that have shaped that society. So federalism somewhere is based on the principle of equity, and unitary system is based on the principle of equality. So equity, right, where everyone may have a role, may have a say as per their own significance, as per their own importance. So federal systems are basically designed to overcome this kind of disparity that may have been historically existing in the society. Are you able to understand this?
So are you assuming that in a federal system, like where
Need for federal system.
where there is heterogeneity in society, minorities must have a say. That's why there is equity.
People, all those people who are having what percentage of representation, all of them will have say as per their role in the society.
So this can also be possible in unitary.
How it will be possible?
There is homogeneous society, but there may be different sects also. No? How can we so sure that everyone wants?
No, you are talking about procedure. I am talking about value system. Procedures तो आप दोनों में same ले आ सकते हो, right? But what will be the sense of participation? In a unitary system, there will be no sense of participation of those people who are neglected. Why? Because a unitary system may work on a particular kind of electoral process, which may not necessarily involve everyone in that process. And still, that political system may work. First past the post system in India, UK, right? It will work. So when you say unless we create this system, both can exist, both can do the same thing, right? But unless we create this system, we do not create a sense of participation. So some things become mandatory to be created, not just because of convenience of governance, right? But because of sense or role of people in that governance. तो लोग तो वहां भी इन्वॉल्व हो सकते हैं, बिल्कुल सही है, लेकिन वो लोग कौन है जो एक दूसरे की तरह है? यहाँ पे वो लोग कौन है जो एक दूसरे की तरह नहीं है? That is why it is necessary. So it is possible, right, that through a political system or democratic system, even in unitary forms, we can have participation of people, right? But the diversity or the level of diversity of the people is much less in that society. Whereas in another society, the level of diversity is so high that we cannot simply assume that they will participate. We'll have to create a system. So somewhere they believe or they accept or somewhere they feel, right, being participated in this system. So federal systems have several reasons for creation. And one of that primary reason is social diversity, ethnic diversity, cultural diversity, right? Variations within the society. So now why it is written? Yes, that is very important. So it is written, just now we said, participation is not only important, right? Or procedures for participation are not only important, but the sense of participation is equally important. The feel, right? The belief that we have or we can participate, that is more important, right? So there is a mechanism for us to allow or to increase our participation, to allow our participation. There is a mechanism. There is a mechanism for participation of everyone. Participate. You want or you don't want. It's up to you. Now, that is not the condition in federal system. In federal system, we want to ensure that people participate, and this gives them a sense of security in this system. So, written, because obviously the nature or the political arrangement, the power arrangement in a federal system, right, is multi-layered. Multi-layered, it's multi-level governance, right? So you have a union, and then you have a regional government or provincial, and then you may have a local. All of them may be relatively free of each other. They have to be. They will be interconnected. Obviously, they are part of the same political system, right? But the nature of division of power, see? So even if we don't divide the power, there can be participation, right? But will it look like participation? It will not. Will it give you a sense of empowerment? It will not. So imagine that they possess their own power, they possess their own power. Now it makes them feel powerful, right? They must possess the power, but they allow us to exercise our participation, but they don't feel empowered. Why? Because they don't possess independent power. It is up to them to decide how they will be involved, right? So let us move. So they have 3 levels of government, or there may be more than 1 level of government, right? Why there will be a provincial government in unitary system also, right? So they will also have multi-level governments, right? But these multi-level governments will not enjoy the autonomy. Autonomy will not be enjoyed. So there will be multi-level governments in unitary system also, right? But each government would be treated as the subordinate of the above. Whereas here, it is not subordinate. In federal system, it is Supreme Court भी बोलता है अपना इंडिया का भी, right? Coordinate. So they are not subordinate, but they are coordinate. They are coordinate to each other. So written constitution now provides that protection. That protection to whom? To the lower levels of government or multi-levels of government below the union level, that they are equally protected in this political setup. Yes, that is the reason. So division of power to hai, but why division of power is needed, right? And why it has to be written in the constitution, so that they do not just feel protected, right? There is a legitimate process. There is a legitimate authentication, verification, evidence of that protection, which is available in the constitution. So it is quite logical that a written constitution becomes inevitable for a federal system. Fine. So federal systems will have their own features. Unitary systems will have their own features. Their values may be same, right? But the way they will be governed will differ. Participation, democracy, ethics, humanity, everything may be same. But why they will have to differ? Their governance will differ because the nature of distribution of power will change. Right? In some families, you listen to father, father becomes absolute decider of everything in the family. Right? In some families, it is not acceptable. Participation is everywhere. Father is more ethical, father is sensitive to children everywhere. Right? But in one, he is more liberal, more democratic, probably more willing to delegate his power. In one, he is not. Same thing, right? So they may have similar value system, they may have similar objectives, right? But the way they will function, the process or the movement of power and authority, that will be different. Fine. See, so federal system, we'll talk about it, right? So written constitutions have their own benefit. Unwritten constitutions have their own benefit, right? Unwritten constitution or conventional constitutions definitely in modern political systems are not given that importance. Why? Because it is believed that whosoever is in power will always be able to misuse the power. So in unwritten constitutions, it is difficult to control that kind of arbitrariness. Right? Even though you'll understand that if we talk about UK, then the conventions are so developed, they are so developed that they have become part of their political culture now. They think that way. They act that way. It has become norm for them now. It has become a custom for them. So normally, even if something is not written, it will be done in that particular manner. Right? Many of their parliamentary procedures, they are based on conventions. But now, as they have become so rigid, they have become so established that there does not seem to be a difference between a convention and a law. Agree? Why? Because it has been now many years, 300 plus years, right, where the democracy is functioning technically more than that. And they have now established this as more like the established as norms, rules, laws. And yet it has flexibility to be changed. See? So they have a lot of convenience in amending, modifying their constitutions. Whereas rigid constitutions believe that power once concentrated in a system, right, can normally be misused. The rigid constitutions always have that belief that once power is there, right, it may not be exercised by the people in a humanistic or in a pro-people manner. They always believe that. That is why they try to write each and everything. For example, India. Obviously, American Constitution or in American system, obviously the Union or federal constitution is different and the states have their own constitutions, right? And technically the federal constitution does not write about them in detail. It only gives references to them, right? Whereas in India, we have our one single constitution writes about everything. State, local, everything is there in the single constitution. On that ground, obviously we are not federal. The states enjoy autonomy, but they are not sovereign. There, they are both. In US context, they are not, because by a special law, right, they have restricted the power of the states to go away from this federation. It is uniquely to US that there the federal system, the units which have come together, they cannot go out of it. That has been done by exclusive law. Otherwise, they have internal sovereignty but not external sovereignty. The question which was raised in the Supreme Court in Article 370 evaluation, Jammu and Kashmir has internal sovereignty? No. It has internal autonomy. So neither it has internal sovereignty nor external sovereignty in that regard. So see. So unitary systems do not believe that the regional units must have internal sovereignty, must have internal autonomy, right? Why? Because they believe there is no need for doing it because the system has continuity, it has homogeneity. There is nothing peculiar about governing at the regional level. They say it's okay. It's the same thing that we are doing. So it is more like delegation of power from higher to lower, right? Whereas in federal system, like I said, there are several complications. So here, the power is available, power is distributed by a particular source. That is the constitution. And that is why it has to be written, because it should not create imbalance in this division of power. Because this is the fundamental principle of federal system. If this fundamental principle is violated, there is no federal system. So you have autonomy, but you don't have sovereignty. Right? You may have internal sovereignty, you may not have external sovereignty. For example, US. They have internal sovereignty, but not external sovereignty. In India, we have autonomy, but neither internal nor external sovereignty. Right? That is why when we were being formed, when our states were being formed, you might have read all those 𝗟𝗲, right? We did not try to use plebiscite. Right? In Jammu and Kashmir, in certain sensitive areas, we did not go for plebiscite, even though it was happening in certain areas. Because plebiscite is a process which somewhere creates the sense of sovereignty. Why? Because people of that particular area, right, by a majority, by a consensus, have decided something that establishes the sovereignty of that decision. Because everywhere we are saying, no, power is flowing from where? The people. So constitution भी तो people ने बनाया. वैसे ही अगर आप प्लेबिसाइड करा दे तो टेक्निकली क्या एक तरह से मिनी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ही तो बन गया, या कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल प्रोविजन क्रिएट हो गया सी बाय द पीपल. So that plebiscite may be treated as a transitional constituent assembly when it is being done. That is why it was not being done. Right? So any system, any area which has gone through the plebiscite may automatically accept, right, that what we have taken, the decisions we have made, it's a sovereign decision. So it is quite obvious that when we study polity, constitution, governance, the legal, the vocabulary, the conceptual understanding comes by understanding the vocabulary. Right now, so you have a political system, right? You have a power, you have a constitution. The constitutions or nature of constitution, the way constitutions are designed, it has a lot to say about the people, the kind of power system we have created, or the kind of future a political system will have. Right? So study of constitution is fundamentally based on first the understanding of how the constitutions emerge, what are their nature, what are their types, and in general, what are the values which are associated with them. So one type of question comes around this idea that constitution, or regarding the constitution, or regarding the values of the Indian constitution, or regarding the constitution, this constitution versus this constitution, these statements or which of the following statements are correct, or maybe an assertion reasoning based on the same can be asked, right? So one thing very important is to know the concepts, right? Obviously the urge for creating constitution now, why there is urge for creating a constitution? Why can't we govern ourselves by existing practices, traditions, whether written or unwritten? I'm not saying, both are constitutions, right? Why don't we follow just the traditions, conventions, practices, and we can govern ourselves? Like we talk about panchayats. Now panchayats have been legalized, but traditionally the panchayats were functioning as per their own traditions and customs, and every panchayat was doing so, right? So why can't we have such kind of system? We are not secular.
So there will be
How does that matter?
There will be no homogeneity and there will be anarchy in the society. There will be frequent clashes between different sections.
So what about self-governance?
power from the higher authority. Even in self-governance, there is a kind of regulation, monitoring. They are not independent.
Correct. But every system prefers to be governed by itself. Democracy has the same idea. Now let's see. Now you said democracy. Right? We are all talking about, our context is democracy. Everything that we'll talk about will be in the context of democracy. Right? Democracy, as you know, is considered to be a system, right? Simplify in two aspects. Self-rule and shared. Self-rule and shared rule. We believe in individual rights, individual freedoms, the identity of the individual, right? Where there is no external control over us. We are free to govern ourselves or individually, right? Look after ourselves. So we do not need any external system to regulate, control, or direct us. Right? Shared rule, obviously, we think in collective terms. We don't just talk about individual aspect, we think in collective terms. And somewhere a balance between collective, right, and individual is created. Right? Balance is created. Who will dominate? Now that is why we said both. This is a misconception, right? Like Wilson had talked about. In democracy, the multitudinous monarch, the public opinion dominates, right? It's okay, yes, public opinion dominates. That's a problem with the democracy. But is democracy based on that fundamental premise? It is not. The democracy is based on the fundamental premise that both needs to be protected, individual as well as collective. One should not dominate the other. Otherwise, kya hoga? See, now here comes an important concept. If this happens, if this dominates this, then it will lead to majoritarianism. So see, normally the democracies function as majoritarianist systems, right? But all majoritarian systems are not democracy. Right? But all democracies tend to become majoritarian. Understanding? All majoritarian may not be democracy, right? They may be religious, theocratic states dominated by a particular religion, right? When Mughal rule was there was majoritarianism. It was not a democracy, right? British tried to establish democracy, right? But still, there was no element of participation. It works both ways. So if this collective dominates, there will be majoritarianism. If the individual dominates, then libertarianism. Libertarianism comes with the idea, right, that what is it that forms the fundamental basis of a democracy or political system? That is the individual freedom, liberty. People are liberty seeking. So the primary purpose of the political system is to establish that individual liberty, right? Liberty कोई collective concept नहीं है. Freedom एक absolute concept है. Freedom is not conditional, right? Liberty can be conditional. Freedom is freedom. उसका कोई moral judgment, ethical judgment नहीं होता है. That's freedom. So see, so when you think of individual, obviously if we focus too much on individual, it will lead to obviously individual rights, personal sphere, privacy, and so many things will emerge, right? That broadly is visible to you in Indian context, right? (1921), etc. Too much of that, right? Collective, like you said, DPSP, right? But it's not always like that, right? Collectiveness is visible, obviously, in the concept of equality. We are talking about not individual equality, but community equality also, right? 25 to 28. The religion is a matter of individual faith, no doubt, but no religion can exist at individual level. It can only be faith, not religion. Cult, it also needs group. Occult, that also needs group. What is occult? Religious practices, black magic are occult. They have also an existence in religion. Okay. That somewhere supports this idea. So see, the democracy comes with a relationship. The relationship of shared and self. Now self, is it talking only about individual? No. Now see, when you say a community, it's collective entity, but how does community think? As one. Community thinks as one. There are a lot of people, but how do they think? They think as one. तो कम्युनिटी क्या हो गया? एक इंडिविजुअल की तरह ट्रीट होने लगी. Are you getting? But in that community, participation of all will take place. You see, every level we have a balance between individual and collective. Individual and collective. ग्राम सभा collective है. Fine? लेकिन ग्राम सभा किससे बनता है? इलेक्टोरेट से बनता है. All electorates have the similar identity, similar power, same level of importance as per the constitutional provision, as per the law. Fine? You see? So democracies, right, tend to somewhere, or they try to balance this. The collective, the individual, right? The community with community, right? The majority with minority. So democracy is a concept which must be visible with certain features only. Right? But it's not necessary that all the features will be in every democracy. It's not necessary, right? It should have some fundamental principles. If you studied NCERT political science, class 10th पढ़ा है constitution at work, वो भी है. So क्या है? You can have direct, right? Indirect. There can be other variations also, but let's not confuse on the first day. There are other variations also in this, right? Presidential, parliamentary, right? Direct, direct democracies are not visible to the as such, fine, but we have direct democratic devices, tools of direct democracy, right? For example, you can just write it down. Initiative, referendum, plebiscite, And now all this can be done through digital process, right? More easy. In the presidential system, as you know, dichotomy is quite clear. We'll talk about that state as concept. So executive, legislature, various organs of the state are quite clearly their powers and functions are divided. So we see in a presidential system, generally there is separation of power. In parliamentary system, you do not find the separation of power, right? And somewhere there is separation between executive and judiciary.
So I think it would be better to say that we have separation of powers, but the powers are overlapping.
Then how can it be separation? But not.
That's the unique feature of Indian.
See, whatever we do, so if we put butter in Maggie, then we say ये unique Maggie हमारा creation है. Are you correct? But see, कुछ तो convention है ना, कुछ चीजें conventional हो गई. Some things, that is why I said, when we are not rigid about everything, then some things Indian constitution में भी conventional है बहुत सारी चीजें. So whatever you are saying कि भाई separation of power नहीं है, separation of power वहाँ पे और specifically fixed होगा, established होगा, right? जहाँ conventions का role कम होगा. Then only the things will be written. When they will be written, they'll be enforced. So wherever there will be influence of conventions, the absoluteness or the ideal principle of separation of power will not be visible. But yes, it's a feature of parliamentary system. We'll talk about it. What does it mean over a period of time, right? Fine. So let us say, so executive and judiciary, but legislature and executive, the separation of power is not visible. That is diluted. I would not say it is not there, right? But it is diluted. So now see, so democracy has to have some essential features. One, what is the essential feature of democracy?
Universal elected franchise.
Now tell me, people's participation means everyone's participation or majority's participation or only the participation of few who are willing to participate? But democracy में तो ऐसा है नहीं, it's not like that. But see, there is public participation, you are saying. Then, where is that participation? 30% participation is participation. Then what does it mean?
So democracies safeguard and promote the participation of all, but when it is seen in practice, it is generally the rule of the majority.
Let us, so if I say that 25% participated in the voting process, right? And our democracy has survived, will it be correct? Why not? Just now you said public participation. Okay? Now, nowhere it is written that 75%, 80% people should participate. It is only written people should participate. In that scenario, the democracy seems to me more autocratic than an autocracy, than a monarchy. It looks logical. Even in a democracy, it is more easy to exploit, to dominate, to centralize than in other systems.
So can we say that people have a choice in democracy? Not participating is also means to showcase it.
But it does not then create the necessary condition for existence of democracy. But democracy को exist होने के लिए भी तो कुछ participation चाहिए ना? So having a choice, kind, is not necessarily the fundamental character of democracy. Choice can exist in many ways. What does it mean to have democracy?
The source of power.
See, supremacy of people, correct. Participation नहीं. Participation तो कम ज़्यादा हो सकता है. Because we cannot define that, right? And that is what makes the democracy more dynamic in nature compared to other systems. So if we are using some direct democratic devices, then we define it. कि भाई referendum would be acceptable only when 50% plus 1 or 51% people vote in favor of something. Right? But what makes it more fundamental in character, right? That is supremacy. In whatever form now that will be, people are sovereign, people can participate, people have choice to participate or not to participate, that's fine. So supremacy of people. Now the logic comes whether the state is working under the people or not. So when you say democratic state, is the state working under the people, below the people or not? It is. That is why we say that democracy is preferable. You can have any other form of state, the state will control the people will not control the state. So, this will be obviously engulfed under the public control or people's control. So that is why we say by supremacy of people, or let's say citizens. So that is one fundamental character, supremacy of people. The state has to be subordinate to the people. That's why when we say you are a public servant, you are a public official, or you are a political office bearer and you must respond to people, obviously that does not mean it's that simple, but at least it exists. In theory, to hai na bhai. So that is why you say कि bhai, when we think of India, right, or when we say we the people, so we the people are sovereign. So sovereignty lies with the people, not with the state. Okay, that will be a statement in the exam that which of the following is true with respect to the fundamental character of a democracy. The sovereignty lies with the people, the sovereignty lies with the state. It lies with the people. So why? Because supremacy of people is fundamental character of democracy. Now obviously by mechanism, by a method, we have, for example, I'm taking Indian context as example, we have, otherwise there are many examples, we have somewhere provided this or transferred this sovereignty, or I would not say transferred permanently, but we have just provided a mechanism by which this sovereignty could be exercised on our behalf. On our behalf, by whom? Now comes the role of the state. So democracy fundamentally by character is people-centric. People dominated. Supremacy of the people and sovereignty of the people. People will now create a mechanism by which this sovereignty would be provided to the state. Right? Being sovereign means
not influenced by external pressures.
sovereignty or suzerainty. What is the difference? Goa became independent when? 50 में तो हुआ नहीं था, ये मैं बताता हूँ तुम्हें.
1985. No, 61.
61. अरुणाचल कहाँ गए सब मित्र तुम्हारे? ज्यादा पॉइंट पढ़ लिया इन्होंने. अब इन्हें लग रहा है कि हम खुद ही पढ़ा लेंगे अब. this. Why it is not visible? Sovereign means not taking influence. Sovereignty is both internal and external. Sovereignty is a claim. Right? It's a claim that we no longer, or we are, as a political system, as a power system, we are no more influenced, whether in deeds or in mind, both. तो माइंड और एक्ट दोनों में हम किसी का इन्फ्लुएंस एक्सेप्ट नहीं करते. It's not just about a legal system, right? It is the claim made by this sovereign people, the people that in any form, in thought, action, intellect, mind, whatever, we don't accept anyone's influence. So neither culturally we are dependent ho, yeah, culturally we are subordinate to someone, politically we are subordinate to someone, intellectually we are subordinate to someone, okay, as a thinking being we are subordinate, nothing. Territorially, politically, emotionally, intellectually, culturally, mentally, decision making wise, we are free. That is the idea of sovereignty. And sovereignty is not given, it is claimed. Right? It is declared that yes, we are sovereign. Suzerainty is like a conditional sovereignty, or don't say sovereignty, it's a conditional freedom. So when you say the lapse of British paramountcy or paramountcy, the British paramountcy means what? Even if they may not be physically present, they would have been treated as our final, go-to system, final system of controlling, right? Or we being subordinate ultimately to them. That was the idea. So they created a paramountcy. That means all the colonies which were there, they were technically connected to each other through what? One centralized power system. Fine. So sovereignty is one of the most important claims that the modern democracies have to make, or most of the modern democracies seek that sovereignty, right? Now, sovereignty has obviously two dimensions, internal and external. The external dimension of sovereignty relates to what?
International affairs, relationship of a country with the world.
Correct. So what does it relate to? Correct. What are the unique aspects of this external? Which one is more important initially? External, internal?
Initially,
When we are starting off as political system. It's not visible. So, internal चाहिए पहले external. Oh. Then do we need this to create this, or this to create this? It's right. But when you will buy a house, when you'll have no more a landlord, then you'll do whatever you want with your house. Fine. Or you'll do whatever you want with your house, then you'll go and say, ki, bhai, landlord, now I don't want you. I'm going to buying this house. Once I repair, I restructure it, then I'll buy the house. How will it be? No. They have to be established simultaneously. Why did Mountbatten came to India? India Independence Act, 1947. Right? Mountbatten Plan. क्यों बनाया गया? उसी समय हम कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन बना रहे थे. We were making the constitution then only, no? And when we were making the constitution, had we claimed sovereignty? नहीं, ऐसे ही बना रहे थे constitution. यानी that means that constitution is not made by the people of us, India. ये मेरे बाल कलाकार, ये बताओ, ठीक है? So your father tells you, for example, you are free to make decisions, right? Make the decision and then tell me. Is it freedom?
It's bounded rationality.
Then why he is telling this? He might be concerned about you, right? So do you say that it is a freedom which has been pledged for the care and emotional support that I get? So I'm pledging my freedom so that somebody cares for me. That means you don't want freedom. Fine. But for me, freedom is absolute. Right? Once you give it, I will never come to you. I'll enjoy that freedom. See, let's say when India, the constitution was being made, and the bigger constituent assembly got broken into two constituent assemblies, right? We had a constituent assembly. That constituent assembly was making the constitution. Was that constituent assembly sovereign or not?
Yes.
Now he says his logic may also be accepted. He says it is not. Why? Because that constituent assembly was made by what? The British law. So if you go to a constitutional expert and you go and argue in the Supreme Court, they will say yes. But they will say that legally, as per the philosophy of law, right, we have not freely made our constitution, and that is true. So while we were usurping external sovereignty, right, we were not internally sovereign. But how can we seek external sovereignty when we don't have internal sovereignty? हम किसको बोलोगे कि हमें सोवरेन रिकॉग्नाइज करो जब हम खुद ही अभी कुछ नहीं है? कैसे बोल सकते हैं? राइट? कि तुम पहले रिकॉग्नाइज करो मुझे, देन मैं बनूंगा कि मैं क्या हूं. Will it be like that? कि first you recognize me, then I will be what I am saying I am. How will it happen? That's an interesting debate. Tell me, how will it happen? You want to say, you want someone to make your Aadhaar card, right? For the person which you are not. Once the Aadhaar card is made, then you'll say, no, I will become because it is on the card. But it's very conceptual. It's very logical thing, see? Okay, that's why I tell you prelims is not tough. It's logical exam. It is tough because so many people appear, no doubt. किसको? अरे वो सब छोड़ो, तुम्हें एग्जाम क्लियर करना है ना, वो छोड़ो. You don't get into political debate. You tell me the logic. Is it possible to have one without the other? No. That is the idea. As simple as that. So the claim for internal sovereignty has to be authenticated by the claim for external sovereignty. So we talk about that India or countries, the states, the democracies or democratic states which are created, right? They claim for the sovereignty, right? Both has to have simultaneous presence. It is fine. For time being, first we can have this, right? And then probably we can go for this. Right? Then obviously once we have is, we can readjust this also. We did that also, see? That is why I say when we made the constitution, that constituent assembly was created as per the guidelines of the British Parliament, right? But when we were making that constitution, we realized or we claimed that we are sovereign, right? The constituent assembly is sovereign of the power and influence of the British Parliament, and what we are making is the sovereign constitution. And Logically, obviously, once we did that, and then we created the Union of India, right, or the political system of India, and we claimed under Article 1 that India, that probably will no more be, right, but India, that is Bharat, shall be Union of States. So we claimed that, right? Now see, once we claimed that, then we decided, okay, what this India will be? It will be all the territories now, right, which are part A, B, C, right, which are still not in part of the India. But we will make it now as part of India. See, then after that, again, we claimed our internal sovereignty. So States Reorganization Act 1956, which actually created now reorganized the states, right? Or accession of certain states, annexation of certain states, I would say, not directly through a democratic process, but we did that. So we created our internal sovereignty also once we claimed our external sovereignty, right? Now see, both exist, no doubt, right? So when we say sovereignty, sovereignty is now, like I said, what is the characteristic here? The characteristic is the legal recognition. That is the core idea, right? That even though we are claiming that speech, thought, action, intellect, culture, we are free. Fine? We don't have borrowed anything. So logically, when we say that, okay, yes, we are claiming it and now recognize this. So why will you recognize it? Why will you recognize it? Because whatever claims we are making are authentic. राइट मैं टॉपर हूं और मैं इस गलती का सारा श्रेय अपने ऊपर लेता हूं, लेती हूं. या मैं टॉपर हूं बट मैंने सब कुछ बोरो कर करके टॉप किया है, इसलिए शायद मैं कलेक्टर की नौकरी अपने आप ना कर पाऊं, मुझे कुछ लोगों की सहायता चाहिए होगी. जिन लोगों ने राजेंद्र नगर में मुझे पढ़ाई करने में मदद की है, मैं उनको साथ लेके जाऊंगी अपने. You will claim, right? When you say I am the topper, right, that will be visible. You don't have to say it, right? And there is no need for the list to prove it. Right? All our toppers who are coming from 10 lakh people, finally into 600, 700 people, they are all our toppers. Right? All are coming from their academic backgrounds, all have some extraordinary backgrounds. Right? It's like a football ground. Somebody gets the front seat, then somebody will get the back seat. Obviously, all of you cannot sit on the front seat, no? So that's quite logical. So when you say, right, that you have to recognize me, right? It's okay, why to recognize you? Because whatever claims you have made, they are authentic, they are legitimate. So how will you make this claim now? See, that is why the idea of state comes. So when you say claim the sovereignty, which is something, an illogical concept, but still we accept it, that when you claim the sovereignty, then you claim it from what? From some global order. Right? There is a global order. There is a global system. From this system, you are claiming or proclaiming. You want it to recognize you. Right? That is what the international law is, or United Nations as the symbol of international law. Right? Is. So ultimately, right, you can say that there is need for recognition. Once you are recognized, now obviously you are treated as one of those unique states or one of those unique political systems, right, which have some peculiar features, which have some distinctive features, and which have been legally recognized as part of this global order. So the League of Nations, or then the United Nations, which was formed later on, right? They all had this particular purpose. The purpose was to create a just, fair, equitable, coordinate global order. So you can say technically you are getting registered to an agency which legitimizes your profession. कि मैं डॉक्टर हूं तो मेडिकल एसोसिएशन से मुझे रजिस्ट्रेशन जरूरी है, तो मैं स्टेट हूं तो मुझे यूनाइटेड नेशन से रजिस्ट्रेशन जरूरी है, एंड दैट विल क्लेम माय सोवरेनिटी. व्हाई? ऑटोमेटिकली इट विल गिव मी अ पीयर ग्रुप. It will give me a group of countries, right, which will help me, which will support me, or who will become part of this, or I will also, become part of this global community. Pressure group, right? You'll have an international pressure group with you. So basically, sab to power hi hai, right? Ultimately, everything is power politics. So let's understand this way, simplified. So you have a legal recognition, right? Internal sovereignty, obviously, is claimed in the Constitution. Right? It is claimed in the Constitution. It can be enforced through acts, or it can be obviously claimed in the Constitution, obviously through what? Through the claims made by the citizens within their own territory, and this claim is duly accepted by the political system they have created. So now comes the biggest question. Just now we said, in a democracy, the state is subordinate to the people, right? But once we claim the sovereignty belongs to the people, but people transfer this sovereignty, or they, through a mechanism, they outsource this sovereignty to the state. Now, once the state becomes the reflection of people, once it becomes the replica of people, now the state becomes powerful. So when we say sovereignty of the state, there's a very important concept, at least for prelims or for concepts. See, so when you say sovereignty of the people, right, the ultimate power belongs to the people. When the people transfer this, right, like I said, citizens claim transferred through a constitution to whom? Those who are governing us, right? Correct. So for practical purposes, when citizens transfer this claim to the state, right, now state, when it starts exercising this power, right, now state will have two representations. One, the state will have, obviously state is the replica or representation of people, and one, the state has its own independent. It has its own independent identity, right? This independent identity is what? It is called sovereign functions. See, so it's not political sovereignty, it's functional sovereignty. While performing certain functions, the state will now act independently of the society to which it belongs, right? Or through which it has been created. There's a very thin line. हाँ, इसमें क्या confusion है बताओ भैया? इसमें क्या problem है बताओ? हाँ, नहीं बताओ तो. That is where the problem comes. Distribution is visible in any system of the world. When you think of people or society, right, the ideology of people participation is good, right? But the real impact of the people's participation, what will happen to the governance? The people are not a single category. They are not equally educated. They are not equally literate, right? Majority of them are putting all those rubbish videos. IAS में क्या पूछा गया था जिसने कभी यूपीएससी का एड्रेस भी नहीं देखा है लाइफ में अपने, तो उन लोगों से तुम्हें चाहिए recommendations. Then
Sir, question क्या
बताओ भैया. I am saying, see, question ये था that ये है, तो she is saying कि how come there is an independent identity of the state. You try to understand when, right? Let's say you are using a shampoo, right? Now that shampoo has some unique ingredients. The shampoo is in your hand. You are about to put that on your head. Once you put it, what happens now? Will the hand be able to now take it back? Huh? अरे इतना जवानी हो भी मैं, हाँ, right? So what will happen? क्या आप उसको वापस ले सकते हो उसका impact? एसिड हाथ पे गिर गया, आपने अपने हाथ से अपने हाथ पे एसिड डाल दिया, क्या होगा? उस एसिड का वापस ले आ सकता इम्पैक्ट? क्यों? वो तो आपके कंट्रोल में है. The pen was in your control when you were writing the answer. Once you have written that answer on the paper, now that pen cannot do anything. Your hands cannot do anything. Why? You try to understand, that is the idea. You have power once you have given the power. Right. Try to understand, this is a very thin logic, thin line separating the practical from the ideology. Once you have given them power, you cannot sit and monitor them all the time. They have to perform certain functions where they do not need your permission every time. So if somebody has to shoot on the border, he is not going to ask the colonel who is sitting somewhere, sir, kya karoon? Right? That person is about to kill me. Should I kill him? Right? See. Try to understand. So we now understand that the state's sovereignty gets divided into one, the sovereignty now which does not control or does not conform to people's control. And other part of the sovereignty remains as it is, right? So you can say this is the broader sovereignty. This is the specific sovereignty which the state enjoys now on behalf of the people. This is a very important concept because then you will understand the next idea, right? Now see, so can we say the state that we created, right? The democratic systems which form that state, the state itself which acquired the sovereignty from us, we are the absolutely sovereign, ultimate sovereign, right? But we have transferred it to the state for certain functions that it has to perform. Now a part of that transfer of power now belongs or is possessed by the state and does not remain with us anymore. Theoretically it remains, practically it does not, right? That is why I try to understand. That is where now the states can make AFSPA and use it against us only. They can have preventive detention laws, national security acts, and unlawful activities prevention act, or some act, right? Makoka, TADA, whatever, and now they can implement on us. Or they can make decisions with respect to Pakistan, USA, regional trade, diplomacy, international relations, and they need not ask us all the time. Approved by the cabinet, cabinet represents us, finish. Are you getting? This is called the sovereign immunity. So yes, sovereign immunity, right? But problem ये कि वो prelims में नहीं पूछेगा. So what to do? Huh? So sovereign immunity of the state. See, every state enjoys this sovereign immunity of the state, right? This sovereign immunity of the state now somewhere distinguishes now the state with the people. People do not enjoy this, right? But the functionaries of the state, those who are part of the state, who are performing functions on behalf of the people, they start enjoying this power, sovereign immunity. Right? For example, in Indian context, you'll see Article 299, 300, right? Or technically the privileges enjoyed by the president and the governors, right? Or certain kinds of powers which the state enjoys with respect to diplomatic functions, with respect to foreign relations, and likewise.
Sovereign immunity. So there comes a concept in this vicarious liability.
Vicarious liability is taught.
One who does gets it done.
थर्ड पार्टी नहीं कर सकता, बट स्टेट को पास ऑलरेडी पावर है ना, इतनी स्टेट हैज लॉट ऑफ पावर, राइट? So you cannot say कि भाई the state whatever it performs, whatever it does, right? Everything it has to prove in front of the people. It does not have to prove in front of the people. Why should it? Right? So many times the consequences created by the state, right? They remains exclusively the domain of the state. So what happened in Jammu and Kashmir? What happened in surgical strike? What happened here? Who is going to ask? Who is going to review? Where is your sovereignty now? Right? So anybody who is a citizen of this country will have that sovereignty. Right? So you can say, now understand this way, that they enjoys certain privileges. MPs enjoys privileges, but not the 92 MPs now who are sitting outside the parliament. Fine. Modi ji is waiting for century. Okay, who are those 8 other people whom we should suspend now, so that at least we should have 100 people MPs suspended. Wow, right? So 1989 also they had suspended. Before that 69 MPs were suspended in 1989, right? But obviously this is a different scenario today. It's an age of digital era. When in 89 maybe they had, right? Indira Gandhi ne bhi kiya tha, but 67 to 64 to Nehru was there, right? So somewhere, right? Or 60 MPs maybe somewhere, right? 69 MPs something, right? So let us say that you have privileges, parliamentary privileges, right? The Supreme Court, the judicial bodies enjoy certain kinds of immunity, right? The magistrates enjoy immunity. The people who are involved in certain kinds of functions, they enjoy immunity. What are they doing? All of them are enjoying the immunity of the state. And here, a normal person may not be able to say that, okay, I have given you this sovereignty, and why am I not enjoying this sovereignty, right? This is a very important concept to understand, that what is the difference. Now here, the difference emerges, right, between the state, right, and civil society. Right? Otherwise, we were saying in a democracy, it is the civil society, that is the society, right, which controls the state, which owns the state, which has sovereign power to regulate the state, right? But in essence, what is happening? The civil society is distinct from the state now, as per this logic. Right? And it was obviously one of the famous philosophers, Hegel. Hegel separated the state from civil society. So in common sense way, you can understand that there comes a time, there comes an idea or logic where the society is now distinguished from the state. The society created the state, but because of the power or difference in power between those who are sitting in the positions of state or power of state, right, they become more powerful than the society itself that created it. And that is why the concept of democracy becomes essential. That democracy is supremacy of the people, right? And that is to ensure this, now we need what? We need the separation of power. So in presidential system, the separation of power, going back to the discussion we were doing, is more absolute. In parliamentary system, separation of power is not that absolute, but still it guarantees that people's rights, people's power, people's sovereignty, individual freedom must be protected. How? Through an independent judicial system. So see, every constitution or every modern day democratic constitution which is written to govern democracies, they all have some common principles. One, supremacy of the people, whether it is presidential or parliamentary, it doesn't matter, right? Second, rule of law. So you might say कि भाई law तो हर जगह, yes. तो having a law or having a rule of law, having a law, having rule of law, these are two different things, right? Now, so the second important principle after supremacy of people is the rule of law, which should be distinguished from the law. Right? Can I say this? Let me just write this term. कि भाई ये essential है. Law is different from rule of law, right? Governing by law and governing by rule of law, they are different. So an autocrat, a monarch, a dictator, right? Any form of government, any form of political system may establish a system of rules, regulations, procedures, which may be called as law. Understanding? So, क्या मैं distinguish कर सकता हूँ? See, rule of law versus rule by law. Rule of law versus rule by law. क्या difference है? You can have laws, different laws for different people that will be ruled by law. Because it is the law which is ruling, right? But you may not have equality before law. You may not have equal protection of law, right? You may have discriminatory laws. So when you say rule by law, talks about a standard legal system by which a society is being governed. But how this legal system is, whether it is fair or unfair, that is not clear in this analysis. But when I say rule of law, that means the system not only is governed by the law, but that system is governed by the fair, just, transparent, and equitable principles of law. So this law itself has been made in a particular manner, right? Rule by law talks about once the law is made, then the law is now being applied to the society. But how this law itself is made, what is the nature of law, what is the ethical character of this law, that is not clear. Understanding? So a king may make an arbitrary law and that may be ruled by law. Fine? When nobody can make an arbitrary law and the law-making system itself cannot be arbitrary, the procedure cannot be arbitrary, the content of the law cannot be arbitrary, right? And nobody can apply it in an arbitrary manner. That is rule of law. So next fundamental character becomes is what? Rule of law. Not necessarily rule by law. तो लॉ और रूल ऑफ लॉ में खुद फर्क है कि नहीं? लॉलेस लॉ, what is that lawless law? रूल बाय लॉ. वेल लॉलेस लॉ क्या है? जो आर्बिट्ररी हो, which is not based on logic, which is not based on fact, which is highly subjective, which is highly arbitrary, lawless law. अब ब्रिटिशर्स बोलते कि भाई ब्रिटिशर्स ने बनाया गैगिंग एक्ट, राइट? सॉल्ट एक्ट या एंटी सॉल्ट एक्ट, जो भी बनाया, सत्याग्रह एक्ट, राइट? और ब्रिटिशर्स मेड सर्टेन काइंड्स ऑफ जुवेनाइल लॉज, CRPC, IPC provisions which they created, right? So earlier they had kept the juvenile age at 7. Then somehow they increased it to 11. Right? Is it justified? So अगर law बोलता है कि भाई, see, if the law is made and it is said कि भाई whatever you do, right, whatever you do in your private sphere must be reported to the government or must be reported to the thana. It is a law, right? But what kind of law it is? Lawless law. It does not enforce the spirit of law. It only enforces the law. Right? So try to understand, rule of law comes with the concept of the spirit of law. The very nature of fairness that law creates, that is missing in the rule by law. But that is there in the rule of law. And rule of law obviously is, as you might think, in a very common sense manner, is given by 𝗍𝗍. But it is not just 𝗍𝗍 who talks about rule of law. Kautilya talks about rule of law. Right? Mahabharata, where all the laws were violated, also talked about rule of law. Right? Is it correct or not? That also talked about rule of law. Shanti Parv, the Shanti Parv Khand of Mahabharata, right, which talks about basically ethical premises, the moral and ethical aspects of one's behavior. Basically, Yudhishthir's decisions are evaluated there. So that is also a kind of rule of law. They were all following the dharma, right? They were all following Raj Dharma. Right? In fact, look at Bhishma. He was following the Raj Dharma and then he was following the dharma. For him, dharma comes later, right? Is less on the priority than the Raj Dharma. He was bound to the Singhasan. And he said, it's okay, I don't care. I know Duryodhana is doing all the plotting and manipulations, whatever, but I am bound to this Singhasan. What is that? Raj Dharma. Katappa in the modern day, Bhishma. So, right? But you can say, he was bound and the dharma comes later. Right? So, duty, dutifulness, the concept of public duty. Right? तो जो आपको टास्क दिया गया है वही धर्म है आपका. If you start evaluating your own work, right, then obviously you'll start finding out all the problems and issues with the task you're doing, right? Bureaucrat, collector has to do, you focus on doing what collector does, right? Don't focus only on listening or on those to whom the collector has to listen. First do what collector has to do, no? Then talk about CM or MLA or minister, it's okay. They're part and process, part of this process, part and parcel of this process. They are not the only functions you have to perform. No, पहले तो जो करना है वो भी तो करो. Road तो बनाओ. You see, sense of duty. So rule of law not only establishes the obligation to the duty, but it also establishes the fairness, the sense of commitment to that duty. So the spirit of law, right, the essence of law, the essence of fairness in the law is rule of law. Rule by law is simply the procedure established by law or the procedures formed by law. Fine. So lawless law का concept भी वैसा ही है, right? Law है, अब colonial system is the perfect example of this. So arbitrary laws, laws not based on fairness, there is no due process which has been followed and likewise, right? So rule of law becomes one fundamental character. Obviously, rule of law has a very wider perspective. It has a very wider logic than simply talking about 𝗍𝗍's view on rule of law. But in spite of that, yes, let us first simplify it and say, okay, the rule of law concept, even though it has been visible throughout the history, right? So one of the first persons, like we have Bentham, we have James Buchanan, right? We have the contractualists like Hume, Rousseau, Locke, MacIver. There are so many scholars, right, who could be treated as one of the contributors to this idea. Right? So modern day also there are many, the international conference which was held, Delhi Declaration bhi hua, basically on administrative law, So Delhi Declaration में rule of law जो डाइसी का व्यू था उसको narrow view that it modified it. It said कि it should not be interpreted now with the British mindset, with the common law mindset, and it should be studied now with a more broader mindset. So that Delhi Declaration actually not the G20 है ना, G20 declaration अलग है, वो Delhi Declaration अलग है on administrative law, international law. So it 1990s में हुआ था, so it defined or redefined your rule of law. कि भाई Dicey's narrow conception of rule of law, right, is no more valid, or it should be what you can say broadened. It should be viewed today now with respect to the requirements of the modern legal systems today. It should not be narrowly interpreted in terms of only Dicey's 3 principles, right? So, but still, as a starting point, we can always understand कि भाई what are the Dicey's view or Dicey's concept of rule of law. Right? What are these 3 principles? So, rule of law is fundamental. क्या है 3 principles?
Equality.
Correct? No, right?
The predominance of legal spirit. Equality before law.
Correct.
The one who breaches the law should be punished.
No, it is the elaboration of that. Predominance of legal, right? And
No punishment without proper trial.
no punishment without proper trial. Right to be heard. Huh? और भी कुछ है. There's something more broader. Anybody? Rewind. Hint. Prelims में कहाँ से दूंगा भाई तुम्हें? Right? See, from where the power flows, right? Laws or the power, right, which is enjoyed by the people in system or people in authority. That power flows from what? See, so it says the individual rights, the freedoms are not the product of the constitution, are not the source from the constitution. It is the other way, right? So the rights of people do not flow from the constitution. It is the other way. The rights of the constitution flows from the people. Or simplified, rights, freedoms. Do not flow from the constitution, right? But vice versa. So it simply says कि भाई see, ultimately, who is the source of this power? People or constitution? People. Why he was trying to say that? Because that is very important to understand that somewhere can constitutions by their power or people in power, can they undermine people's liberties and rights? They cannot. That is why he wanted to say it. This was quite obvious because he was comparing this legal system, the common law legal system, with the continental law legal system, French administrative court system. He was trying to compare it. So he became more obsessed with this idea, right? But let us understand equality before law. Now you can infer many things out of that, right? Equal protection of law. Everybody is equal in the eyes of law, right? Is there any, or is there universal law which governs everyone? Yes. So the laws are universal in nature. There cannot be privileges, absence of privileges in the system, right? But in spite of that, there will be some privileges available to someone. For example, if privileges are available to the backwards, to the minorities, to the people who are vulnerable, acceptable, because that will enforce equality before law. At least it will create the equal protection of law. So reservations, positive discrimination, women, reservation for women in politics, right? It promotes the equal protection of law. So under the equality before law, it nowhere violates that there is no, or there cannot be a basis, or there cannot be a provision for reasonable classification. There can be, right? Like we talk about in jobs, Article 15, 16, 16. So reasonable classification is allowed, right? This reasonable classification obviously will be conforming to two basic premises like proportionality and the nexus. क्या होता है भैया? अब असली पॉलिटी पढ़ोगे, है ना? अभी तो सिर्फ लक्ष्मी कांड रहते हैं, बताओ. Tell me. Say anything. What are you thinking about? Are you in the class or you are thinking about animal movie कब देखना है दोबारा? मैं आंसर बताने के लिए क्वेश्चन नहीं. बताओ. तुमने भी नहीं सुना? See, imagine all of this. अरे उसके पहले क्या बोला मैंने? बिना सोचे लिख रहे हो? Reasonable classification. Right? So I was trying to say, see, when you are providing protection, special protection to certain groups, right? That enhances, that promotes what? The equal protection of law. So equal protection of law is not violated when there is reasonable classification in favor of those who need it. How this reasonable classification is done? दिमाग लगाओ यहाँ पे, नहीं तो बाहर जाओ. ठीक है? How this reasonable classification done? On the basis of nexus, on the basis of proportionality. ये पूछा था बाल कलाकार तुमसे, बताओ इसको. तो चलो तुम नहीं भाई, you also tell भाई, not. It's that he's visible in the front, so I should not put all the pressure on him. Fine, but this is how he can learn better than you, maybe over a period of time. Pressure. Right? Pressure is so important thing that it cooks rice, it cooks vegetables, right? It makes everything tasty. Pressure.
It makes it diamond.
Yes. Right? So you think you are coal? Yes. That's good. Right, बताओ. So nexus क्या है? Proportionality क्या? See, when you're doing reasonable classification, now you cannot take up any ground and say that there is need for reasonable classification. Why? Because I am backward, I am poor, I am economically weak. That does not create a ground in itself, right? That's an important ground, but does that create a ground in itself? Why? Because you have to also prove that because of this condition, because of this situation, I am facing this problem, I am facing this discrimination, I am facing this dilemma, right? So I cannot simply say कि हाँ भैया all are, you know, in this particular community or in this particular area, right? Everybody is fair and I am dark skinned, right? So I want reasonable protection, right? I want protection under some reasonable classification. Will it be so? You have to prove that that is a ground for. So you go to Germany, you go to Australia, certain parts of America, you'll find racism, right? Racism, there are so many other reasons for that, right? So the logic is that reasonable classification and its ground must be valid. Reasonable nexus means the nexus between, the relationship between the demand, the classification done, right? The ground chosen for the classification and the actual purpose for which it was done. तो पर्पस क्या था? तुम्हारा प्रोटेक्शन। ग्राउंड चूज किया गया, तुम्हारा कलर, राइट? बट क्या ये जो ग्राउंड है और क्या जो पर्पस है, इसमें एक नेक्सस है या नहीं है? सो दैट आई मे मेक अ लॉ, राइट? So tomorrow I may make a law that nobody will be born fair in this country. What will happen then now? पैदा होते ही पॉलिश करने लगेंगे माँ बाप बच्चे को, लाओ भाई चेरी ब्लॉसम, इसको लगाओ थोड़ा. What is this logic? It is illogical. Unfair. Being fair is unfair. That is what you want to say, right? So logically, आप ये बोलेंगे भाई there is a classification, but there is a basis. So what is being done, right? And what is the objective of doing it, right? These are two different things. So whether what is being done, is it serving the objective which we wanted, right? Proportionality also, obviously, the way we are doing it, how much are we doing it, right? Should it be done in that manner or not? So I cannot use 100 rupees to save 5 rupees, no? That will be illogical, right? You cannot spend 100 rupees to save something worth 5 rupees. Obviously, when money is the only concern, right? Otherwise, we can do it. So, proportionality. So, when Amitabh Bachchan in that movie says, he said, right, if you had asked for more money also, I would have given more money for this. You think I have been a bad businessman? He says, my mother used to lift masonry or whatever, the bricks here. And so this has more value to me than in terms of money. That is proportionality. But what is the basis? The basis is emotion. But judicial doctrine of proportionality talks about facts, objective relationship. Are you getting this point? They are not talking about emotional, subjective aspects. So what you intend to achieve, right? And then you can do, right? So equality before law has its own several elements, right? The concept of protective equality, right? The concept of promotional equality, kya hai bhai? Reservation is protective equality or promotional equality? Both. Then women reservation? Both. I'll tell you which one is distinct, right? Then when you say protective equality, your purpose is first to maintain the things as it is or change what is the already existing. There can be two reasons or two ways of promoting this, of enforcing equality. One, to maintain the order, right? So when I say caste system, right? Now caste system, if I say I want to eliminate the caste system, correct, what I'm doing? Protective equality. But I'm nowhere saying that I will promote the lower castes. I'm only eliminating the caste system. But the moment I say I will eliminate the caste system and I will create positive discrimination in favor of those who were backwards, who were low on the caste system, what I'm going to do? I'm going to do both now. नहीं आ रहे? क्यों नहीं आ रहे ये बताओ? दिमाग थक गया? बेटा स्कूल जाओ, स्कूल से वापस आओ, स्कूल जाओ, स्कूल से वापस आओ, राइट? क्या पढ़ा क्या लिखा उससे कोई मतलब नहीं, स्कूल जाओ, स्कूल से वापस आओ. What does it mean? You are following a system, right? You are trying to now, right, establish a system, right, which may not have this disparity, right? But in no way you recognize that there has been a previous exploitation and now you have to overcome it. अभी things stable हो गए, लेकिन जो पिछला ड्रॉबैक है, जो पिछला इम्पैक्ट है, जो पिछला डिस्पैरिटी है, उसको कैसे ओवरकम करेंगे? प्रमोशनल. जब हमने इनको बराबर कर दिया तो इसको प्रोटेक्ट किया इससे कि नहीं, राइट? लेकिन इसको आगे बढ़ाया, ये तो ऑलरेडी बढ़ा हुआ था, ये तो ऑलरेडी आगे है ना. दिस वन ग्रुप इज ऑलरेडी डेवलप्ड, right? But this one, which now has been forcibly made equal to them, does it exist in reality? Is it actually equal to them? No, because it has lot of historical disabilities, historical disparities are there. It cannot be equal so easily. It has to be increased. It has to be deliberately promoted compared to this one. Understanding? So if I say economically weaker sections under RTE, right to education, will go to the public schools, will go to the private schools, right? Basically, public schools are technically private schools, right? So you will go to the private schools, and private schools will reserve the seat for them. What are you doing? Yep. Protective, right? Why? By a law, you are giving them the equal opportunity, right? But now if you add to that they will also go to the same school where other children, high-fi elite school children, are going to the school, but at the same time now these children will be not paying the fee. These children will pay minimum fee. They will get special concessions, or they will get free of cost books. They will get free of cost dresses, whatever. What are you doing now? Now that is promotion. Right? So when you deliberately create conditions where one flourishes because of its typical history and background, right? So that is promotional equality. So equality itself has its broad dimensions, right? Second, jaldi karo bhaiya. Predominance of legal spirit. Right? These are basic concepts. And then only we can talk about 1 to 5, 5 to, there's a lot of complicated things there also, right? Amendments, this, right? Okay, so predominance of legal spirit. What does it mean? One, that don't think, don't act, don't imagine in arbitrary terms. Imagine that arbitrariness is threat to the society. Imagine this way, right? Then you will not do anything wrong, if you imagine this way. What predominates the society? The legal spirit, ethical spirit, moral spirit. Let's say, for example, when you say ethics in governance, right, is not just knowing about what second ARC report is. It is about understanding why at all that report was ever written. What would be the nature of the evolution of the contents of that report in future? Right? What are the possibilities in which we act when we are in a position of power? So how should we act? How should we not act? What if we are compelled to act in a particular? So yeah, uska sense कि भाई practically how can you become a good administrator, decision maker, right? That is the idea. So let us say कि भाई when you say कि भाई I am, or we as a society is predominantly legal spirited, means what? We don't intend to become arbitrary. We prefer an organized legal system. We prefer justice through legal systems than giving justice ourselves. Mobocracy. क्या भाई? Is it a reality? Has it been a reality in our democracy? Sometimes. This danga, that danga, this war, this, that. There's a lot of things have happened already. See, when the mob does something, right, you can register a case. Yes, you can. Against agyat people, unidentified people. That is the biggest threat that democracy has. Okay, that it should not turn into mobocracy. When majority group of people do something, right, either it is turned as vigilantism, right, vigilantism, proactiveness of the citizens, right, citizens becoming, right, in the din they are newspaper reporter, and in the night they are Spider-Man or Superman. In the day they are making momos, and night they are making grenades. citizen vigilantism, right? तो ये लॉजिकल सी बात है. So when people take up the legal cause, right, the legal remedies, or they try to justify their acts, illegal acts, right, under a faceless crowd, mobocracy, right? So damaging public property, killing people, whatever. तो लीगल स्पिरिट का प्रीडोमिनेंस क्या है? वी रिफ्रेन आवरसेल्व्स ethically, emotionally, value-wise from these activities. So throughout the system of governance, there is dominance of legal principles, right? There is acceptance of legal premises and judicial system that works, right? Judicial system that works, right, purely believes in an objective legal system or objective legal principles. They are not subjective principles. That is why the personal laws have been kept technically out of the domain, right? That is why we are trying to have universal civil and universal civil and criminal laws, right? Though we may say that universal civil code may undermine it, right? But it's okay. That will help to a large extent. There can be certain aspects which can be made common, because when there is common interaction, right, when there are common platforms of interaction, भाई एक ही market है ना सबका, एक ही road है, एक ही transport है, so it will not be illogical to say that here there could be certain civil conduct, civic functions which we can perform together. There's nothing wrong with that, right? So predominance of legal spirit through how? Through courts, judicial systems, transparent, fair systems, procedure-based systems, right? That is the predominance of legal spirit. आप किसी भी झगड़े को खुद अपने आप solve नहीं करेंगे. You will go through the temples of justice and then do it. The temples of justice have been created on that legal spirit of objective evaluation, factual evaluation. Fine. So you have established legal systems, you have courts, right? You have judges, you have independent judicial systems based on the same logic. Rights, freedoms of the people do not flow from the constitution, but vice versa, right? The people are the source of the power. See how? That is also established. The second principle may lead to this one. Try to understand. Nobody can be harmed in body and goods, right, except for a distinct breach of law. Let's say one derived principle of the second is nobody can be harmed in body and goods except for a distinct breach of law. What does it mean? Law is supreme. Right, Vincent? So, except for a distinct breach of law, what is defined as illegal in the law is illegal. But it is possible that certain things are not defined in the law also, right? But still, if you do it, it may be illegal. Predominance of legal spirit, right? मैं सिर्फ लॉ को नहीं मानता हूं, right? लॉ के जो का जो बेसिस है, लॉ के जो प्रीमाइसेस है, उनको भी मानता हूं. So if somebody says that not throwing garbage or throwing garbage on the law does not come under any crime, no law defines it, right? But still I will not throw it. Why? Because I have that civic sense that I should not do it. तो ये लॉ भी है और लीगल स्पिरिट भी है, दोनों है. So you don't do anything. Obviously, whatever you do which will be considered as illegal will be what is illegal in the law. So even the law cannot punish you, control you, manipulate you, exploit you, unless it is expressly written in the law. So your any act will only be illegal if the law defines it as illegal. Right? How this law will be interpreted? See, come to this. How do we see that people are the actual source of power? What is law? So 𝗍𝗲 says, what is law? What is that law? What is that rule of law? So he says, what is the law? Law is what is interpreted in the normal courts in front of the day-to-day judges. Law वो है. So law privileged नहीं है. Right? Law does not come from a privileged system. Law eliminates all forms of privileges. Law does not create discrimination. So it says, what is that law? If law does all these things, there is rule of law. Where is this law coming from? So it says, this law is coming from the interpretation of the acts, statutes, policies, bills, whatever is made by the legislature, but ultimately interpreted by the courts. तो कोर्ट क्या है? वो कोर्ट जो कॉमन कोर्ट है, which is accessible to everyone. So see, when people go to the court against the decisions of the government, against the laws made by the legislature, right? Or when judges review the laws made by them, what is happening? The people become the source of this reform, of this transition. तो जो modification आ रहा है power में, law में, वो किसका source कौन बन रहा है? And who is doing it? The common judge, the normal judge, right? He is not a special judge. He is not a privileged position. He is not a royalty. He is not coming from monarchy, right? He is doing it for everyone. It doesn't matter whether it is the prime minister or the peon. It doesn't matter. So what is law? Law is interpreted, right? That is what law is. It is interpreted in common courts, normal courts, in front of those normal judges. वो जज ही हैं जो अल्टीमेटली बताते हैं लॉ क्या है, लॉ नहीं है. Right? So Dicey's rule of law is considered to be fundamental to the understanding of rule of law. Right? Otherwise, there are obviously several people who have contributed to the idea of rule of law. Right? But it does not mean that those countries which do not expressly follow Dicey's guideline, they do not have rule of law. They also have rule of law. If you take rule of law as a philosophy, as an ideology, it is prevalent in most of the developed modern countries of the world. Right? Even in that sense, you can say, okay, China also has rule of law. Communism also is based on rule of law. Yes, but there is difference that probably communism promotes more rule by law than rule of law. Certain regimes favor more dominance of procedures, regulations than the spirit of law. They don't favor that. Right? But that's okay. They have their own way of doing things. Fine. So it is quite obvious that most of the modern political systems have rule of law. North Korea has rule by law, not necessarily rule of law, and likewise. So you find examples for both. But majorly you will say countries follow the rule of law. But that rule of law does not mean Dicey's rule of law. That means ideologically rule of law. Right? Concretely, this ideology was defined by Dicey, right? But it was interpreted by many other people. For example, Montesquieu. Now, Montesquieu talks about the separation of power. Right? Bluntschli in Europe talks about the dichotomy perspective beforehand, right? And separation of power. The administrative law system made in France was based on separation of power. Napoleonic codes, right? Civil services codes, which created the merit principle or which promoted the professionalism in French civil services, was based on rule of law. But what is a code? What are codes of conduct? What are established principles of doing things? They are rule of law. They follow the spirit of rule of law. So it is not just Dicey. Right? India. So if you see, if we have to understand that rule of law, is it Dicey's rule of law or in the general philosophy of rule of law? Right? So then we have to understand that there are two types of legal systems, common and continental, and then there are communitarian or communist. So common and continental. Common legal system is what Dicey's view dominates. Right? In common law system, we say that the highest court or highest interpretation of law is made by the judiciary. The judiciary is supreme interpreter of law. Right? So what will be the final conclusion that will be accepted as law, as a legal conclusion, as a legal premise, that will be coming from the judiciary. So law will be made by legislature, but finally interpreted by the judiciary. So we say common law, there is no duality of law. There is no dual interpretation of law. There is no multi-interpretation of law, right? And ultimately, what is a law will ultimately be decided by one singular system. It will predominate every other interpretation made by any other system. This is generally called a common law system. So if tribunals, high courts, lower courts, even Supreme Court, we were talking about the other day in the first introduction, that 370 interpreted by a constitutional court. So when you say something is interpreted by a constitutional court, it has some value, right? It cannot simply be overruled. That is why we went for the constitutional court in the first place. Otherwise, why will you go for constitutional, bench? Right? So same logic when you say that something is interpreted by lower courts, variety of other bodies, okay, tribunals, administrative tribunals, quasi-judicial bodies, agencies, institutions, boards, regulatory institutions, SEBI, RBI, PFRDA, and whatever, Competition Commission of India, NCLT, whatever. Unless expressly we have stopped it, right? That it should not go to the court. Otherwise, judicial review is the basic structure. So anything which will be interpreted by anyone, anywhere, will be finally interpreted by the judicial court, correct? The highest judiciary, that is why we say common law. A universal flavor, right? A universal essence to be implemented on the society, right? So there is no duality, there are no dual systems, there is no multiple interpretation, right? Ultimately, the essence of the law would be same. In continental law system, where we have, like France, where we have two courts, right? We have dual interpretation of law, right? Does that mean they don't have rule of law? They also have rule of law. Why? Because they have a judicial court and they have an administrative court. Both are based on law. Both follow the spirit of law. Both follow the essence of law. They don't do things arbitrarily. जितना समझ में आया अभी? So legal systems, when we understand, then only we are able to understand कि भाई the essence of rule of law is not about just these features, right? But also the very ideology which establishes the need for rule of law. वो ideology भी important है. It can be in several forms, right? It can be in the form of an administrative tribunal. It can be in the form of a law, legal court, judicial court, or it can be in the form of a legislature. It can be form of anything, committee, commission, whatever we form. But we accept the spirit that whatever will be done through an established system. Okay. All this that we have talked about, right? Talking about setting up a power system, creating a constitution, developing a constitution, using the constitution, right? Why this all emerged? Why to do all this bakwas, you know? And we can simply ask few people that, okay, keep doing whatever you want. We are not bothered. Fine. We want free data, right? Petrol in our bikes, some benefits, right? Some atta, more data, right? और कुछ भी करो, we don't care. Right? हमारे shorts मत बंद करना. Feeding us. Power is something, authority is something to be scared of. Right? Because people corrupt power. Power is not corrupt. People, Jim Morrison, not that Jim Morrison singer, है? Herbert Morrison, right? Scholar है कि भाई power corrupt नहीं करता है. People corrupt power. That's correct. So see, whatever we have done till now, whatever we have talked about, ऐसा होगा फिर ये control करो, क्यों काम है? Because we wanted to establish a constitutional government, not a constitution. A constitutional government is a broader idea, right, which may have constitutional provisions plus a lot of non-constitutional provisions. conventions, traditions, customs, right? And other impacts, judicial reviews and so many other things. Time to time. अब जुडिशियल ने PIL को लीगलाइज कर दिया, राइट? तो वो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में तो लिखा है. It is part of this system or not? Constitutional government. So whatever we have talked about arises from the need of a constitutional government. The constitutional government is something much more than just the constitution. Right? It is the idea, it is the philosophy, it is the basic premise that whatever be the power system that the society needs to govern itself, all this power system will be created with restrictions within them. The power systems will be created in such a manner that they are not able to violate the same power which is being given to them. So those who are exercising power are bound by the same power. That is constitutional government. And this cannot be totally established by the constitution, right? It will emerge from several things: judicial, legislative, constitutional, customary, convention. हर चीज का impact होगा तब. Then finally this essence will emerge. Are you able to understand this? So constitutional government distinct from constitution, right? But having a constitution, having a constitutional government, having rule of law system, having judicial independence, all this emerges from one basic premise: constitutionalism. Right? So constitutionalism is the source for creating a constitution and for creating a constitutional government and for accepting rule of law and for accepting independence of judiciary. So constitutionalism क्या है? वो philosophy है, वो ideology है. It's not just concept of limited government, right? Limited government may be limited by law, but there is a government which should be limited by the spirit of misuse, or restricted from the spirit, or must have the spirit of not misusing the authority. So democratic governments, in essence, are constitutional governments. Fine? Understanding? A prelims, I'm not coming to that exactly today, right? But then you filter this knowledge. And then you try to develop the essence which they have asked, right? Which they ask in the options. So a constitutional government is a restricted government, yes. A constitutional government necessarily may be a democracy, yes. Because that will best fit the system, right? A constitutional government is driven by the spirit or the idea of constitutionalism, yes, it is. Is constitutional government same as the constitution? No. Right? So there are a lot of fine concepts which are to be understood here, right? So we'll continue tomorrow. We'll talk about constitutionalism and basic premises, and then we'll talk about Indian constitution in general, right? Features and probably our article, first part, right? Article 1 to 4, the formation of state, because it is in news, right? Obviously, current perspectives will deal separate classes, but as of now, we'll talk about some aspects of 370 and 371 tomorrow, right? Fine. See you then. Thank you so much, right? आप आए, बाहर आई, है ना? हरीश बाबू. See you then tomorrow, right? तुम्हारे मित्र कहाँ गए? बहुत पढ़ लिख गए हैं वो बेचारे, है ना? ज्यादा पढ़ लिए, कोई बात नहीं, ठीक है? तो आते रहे तो क्या होगा? बाल कलाकार को अच्छा लगेगा, वरना देसी कलाकार बन जाएगा ये बाल कलाकार, right? So tomorrow, fine. See, I have a method, as you know, many of you know that method, right? We'll write many questions here in the class, right? Or I'll write here. You can put it as per, you'll get the PDF here. You can write the answers in your why that answer is that, right? Plus, the questions will be, there will be a lot of questions with 20 plus questions every day. For 5 days will be uploaded on the app in the free test material, That also you can attempt. So it will give you entire assessment. How many attempted, what was wrong, what is wrong, which areas seem to be weak, so it will tell you everything. Fine, but those questions may not necessarily be what we are doing here, right? So when you are given those questions, you just find out what we have done here and use them, right? They will be PYQs and some modified questions from varied sources. So by the time we keep doing things, you will be solving around 2000 plus questions through the app. Plus, इसमें जो होगा वो तो होगा. These are more. These questions will be more creative, designed by us, right? Interpreted by us. Obviously, they will be at par or maybe above the UPSC level. See you then tomorrow.